Going live, tweeting out to everybody. We're live, and this is where I talk for a few minutes, like 20, 30 seconds. And here's my idea, Mike, is for you and other fantasy analysts who have the wherewithal to work on cars, to build your own race car. And then the rest of us can have a fantasy league, like a DFS league, where we, bet and draft fantasy analysts to make the race car and drive the race car to win the fantasy analyst racing league. And you're my number 1-1. You're the shoe-in for 1-1.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I know, I don't know if Mike Clay builds cars. I don't think he does. I know he's into like NASCAR and stuff like that, but I don't think he runs cars or whatever. So I mean, I'll take it as a compliment, whatever that is. But I definitely enjoy it. And it's like I said, I've been spending more money being trapped inside because I just keep ordering things for it because I want to keep on going. So
yeah, it's a great project. It's a great project to do the couch. So let's go. Who is the one player Mike Tagliere will not leave his draft without? That and more this week on the couch. Mike, welcome back. Who's your guy this year? Who's the guy you're going to take a couple of rounds early just to make sure you don't miss him?
I mean, it sounds weird but Juju Smith-Schuster is a guy that I'm going to end up with on a lot of my fantasy teams. Right now, he's going in the 4th round in a lot of drafts. I'm willing to draft him as high as the end of the 2nd round because I feel like the Schuster, there's a lot of things that align for him to kind of get back to those pre-2019 production levels, including obviously Ben Roethlisberger being the biggest one coming back to the lineup, and him moving back to the slot. That's really big for his production because he's no longer going to have to worry about some of those top-tier cornerbacks that we had to worry about in 2019. There were a variety of factors, but knowing how young Juju Smith-Schuster was and how quickly he broke out in the National Football League, I think there's little reason to doubt him. And so people falling, not drafting him until like the 16th, 17th wide receiver off the board, I think that's madness. I think if you get him as your low end wide receiver 1 because you went RB heavy in the first couple rounds, I don't think you should be mad about that at all.
Yeah, one of the things I like to do if I have time, but I never have time to write everything I want to write, is I like to go back and look at last year's ADP and this year's ADP and just see if it makes sense. Like if the ADP is lower or higher, is there actual enough corresponding information? And I know because I was getting too exuberant about the Steelers at this time last year. Maybe not this time. I think it was mid-August when I was getting exuberant about them, tags. And I was saying, well, hey, if you go Juju and James Conner at the turn 1-2, I don't know if that's crazy because this could be a really great offense and Juju could get 160, 170, 180 targets without Antonio Brown, and James Conner can have all these opportunities. Now you can get both of them in the 4th. You may have to take one in the 3rd. Maybe you could get one later than that. And Ben Roethlisberger's back. And are we overestimating how much of Ben Roethlisberger's absence was the problem for that offense? There's a little hitch on whether Roethlisberger can stay healthy, but falling from the late 1st, early 2nd, all the way to the 4th seems like an overreaction. But I'm just a Steelers fan that's been hurt one time too many.
But that's the thing. I think that there's value to be had in offenses that had a bad season because of a lot of varying factors. Like, so look at the Steelers. Obviously, you're getting discounts on Steelers players because of what happened last year. You're getting discounts on a team like the Bears, where if you go back to the Bears in 2018 under Matt Nagy, that offense had a lot of pieces in it you wanted, right? And then you go to 2019 and everybody kind of disappointed outside of Allen Robinson. I find value in teams like that because Matt Nagy, while he was a terrible play caller last year, Trubisky wasn't good. We have double the opportunity of quarterbacks this year. So if Trubisky's not playing well, it's going to be Foles. If Foles isn't playing well, it's going to be Trubisky. It's basically everyone in the offense has a better chance of succeeding, including guys like Anthony Miller, Tariq Cohen, guys that are tremendous values in drafts this year. So I love getting the value on guys like that. And the best thing about James Conner is that you don't have to take the risk to find out. Mike Tomlin already told you that he's going to be the workhorse running back. And even more importantly about all of Tomlin's comments, because I pay attention. Mike Tomlin's a no-nonsense guy. I pay attention. He said that it's James Conner's backfield and that Benny Snell is the backup, not Anthony McFarland, which tells me they took McFarland with a different role in mind for him. Maybe like a Chris Thompson type role where they're going to give him, 6 to 10 touches per game. Hopefully something explosive that can give James Conner a little bit of a rest so he's not dealing with that consistent, 20, 25 touch role. Even if he's getting 15 to 20 touches per game, I am perfectly fine with James Conner, especially when you're getting him at like that RB20, RB24 range. Around some guys that might be a lot more boring. If you were to guarantee that James Conner was going to play, let's say 14 games,
Right.
I think we'd all be drafting him as a top 12 running back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny you come all the way around on things like this because you're right. And maybe, 2-3 months ago, I would have said you probably want to take running backs in 2 out of the first 3 rounds, or maybe all 3 of the first 3 rounds. And now I see James Conner sitting there, and I think there's some things to be exploited on the veterans that we expected rookies to take over for because of the unique nature of this year. Someone like Damian Williams might be worth a lot more than his ADP indicates. And now those later round running backs are looking a little more attractive. My man, the KGB from the Fellowship, says Tariq excites him because you bring up the Bears. And Tariq Cohen was definitely a player. Now, Cohen has said he wasn't taking his conditioning as seriously. That's part of the explanation. But also just the whole Bears offense.
Yeah.
To me, like the car tags, it wouldn't turn over. I mean, and you wonder how much of it was Mitchell Trubisky holding back the offense. How much of that, and then you start to build in. Take your pick: Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller, even David Montgomery. Even if David Montgomery doesn't get any better, if the offense is better, that's more scoring opportunities, facing more defenses and disadvantages. Now we have to count on Mitchell Trubisky to get better. I don't know about that, but or Nick Foles.
There's questions about the Bears for sure. And the questions, I believe there's going to be a benefit to everybody involved, no matter what. Like I said, because if I am one that believes, and I'm tied into Chicago because that's where I'm from. So I know that Ryan Pace's job is probably tied to the season, and Matt Nagy may as well be too, because it's his 3rd season coaching this team. They didn't exactly go in a positive direction last year, so I think they're going to put the best man on the field. And do I think it's Nick Foles? I don't know. I really can't answer that because Nick Foles outside of Philadelphia hasn't looked like a very good quarterback. I mean, you go to his time in Jacksonville, He lost his job to Gardner Minshew. You go back to his time with LA, he was not very good there. I think Case Keenum eventually took the job away from him. So looking at his track record outside of Doug Peterson's offense, it's been really bad. And I think if you were to put him in Matt Nagy's offense last year, it would have been just as bad because Nagy was a terrible play caller. I'm not going to sit here and say that Mitch Trubisky doesn't deserve some of the blame for his play, but there was the creativeness just went away. Everything that they did to Tariq Cohen was like Trubisky rolling out to the sideline, and then we're going to throw it to Tariq Cohen with 5-10 yards of room on the sideline. Get the guy in the open field. You don't see Sean Payton creating plays like this all the time. It was a terrible, terrible season for the entire Bears offense last year. So Tariq Cohen is a guy had no explosive plays last year. Almost, I don't even know if he had a maybe 1 or 2 plays over 20 yards all season. And that's not something that should be expected from a player like him, a guy that's seeing 104 targets in a season. If you get him as your flex player this year, be happy about it. Things are going to get better for him because when you have a traditional pocket passer like a Nick Foles, if the pocket starts breaking down, these guys tend to check down a lot more than someone like a mobile quarterback would be. Trubisky is kind of like an in-between. He's not a mobile quarterback, but he's also not immobile. So Tariq Cohen should continue to see those checkdowns. David Montgomery, a tremendous value in drafts right now because it's a 2-man backfield. There's nobody else in that roster that's going to take the touches away from those guys. So any improvement in the offense is going to lead to improvement for those guys. Those are the values I kind of look for at running back position, especially, if you want to take some of those wide receivers in the earlier rounds.
Yeah. I understand the value of Montgomery on volume. It's just going to be an interesting experiment in some ways because I think everything we see in the present, Mike, redefines what we saw in the past. And I think you're right to point out Nagy as a play caller or just whatever his special little magic dust that he sprinkled on the offense in those games like the Tampa Bay game in 2018.
Yeah.
There was nothing in the little bag of tricks. It can't just be execution. It can't just be the quarterback. And in general, 2019 was fascinating because going into the season, at the beginning of 2019, it was all about who's in Sean McVay's Rolodex, the young, attractive, offensive-minded head coaches. And then led by McVay, we saw them humbled. Zach Taylor was humbled for the most part, although you can't really blame him for a lot of things going on there. Matt Nagy was humbled. Cliff Kingsbury wasn't humbled. The offense, the team really came on. The offense didn't exactly light the league on fire. So it'll be interesting to see if some of these guys can bounce back or show a little more of what they wanted, but I think you've outlined the case for the Bears. And and here's something else I'm interested in, Mike. And in the background, and I'm sure we'll get to this, in general, it'll come up. It's just how this season is going to be different than any other season we've experienced. And you bring up the urgency of Pace and Nagy, right? And I think about franchises like that, and I wonder if teams could start phoning it in earlier in the season than we're used to seeing because of the scale. I've been using that metaphor of the scale, Mike. It's like this. It's the same thing that's happening as it goes on the macro, it goes on the micro, or as it goes for all the people out there, it goes for us at home. All of our scales have been changing, right? All of our sense of justifiable risks or what monetary rewards, material rewards are worth those risks. And I just wonder if for teams, if they know that their coach is a dead man walking, then if this is something that gets them to mail it in earlier, we'll have to watch that. Alternatively, there can always be teams like Atlanta last year that really fought for their coach, they made some midseason adjustments, and really changed into a new team. It's just an entirely different emotional playing field for the players, and it's a highly emotional game. And I don't know how it's going to play out, but I know it's going to be different. What's been bouncing around your head about how to prepare for this season of fantasy football differently than we normally would?
We had that conversation. Dan Harris and I had that conversation about it, and it was like we were trying to figure out what advice you can give to someone to get prepared for a season like this. And it's almost like more important than ever having the backup, like the handcuff to your running back on your roster, because if he goes out, and if somebody else has him on their roster, obviously there's no way you can get him. There's not going to be a running back available on the waiver wire that you could just suddenly pick up. Where I don't want to rely so much on injuries to other people's players, but more worry about my team. And so if you take a guy like Ezekiel Elliott getting Tony Pollard, Alvin Kamara getting Latavius Murray, these guys have tremendous upside. Even if you go as far down as saying Ronald Jones and Keyshawn Vaughn or Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay, if you want to tie those guys together, yes, they may be in somewhat of a timeshare. DeAndre Swift, Kerryon Johnson, we could do this all day, but it's the idea that if one player is missing time, you're going to be able to sub in someone and not necessarily worry about an injury to some other team. I always worry about my team in fantasy football, where I'm not so worried. Like, have you ever heard the argument where people talk about trades and, oh, I can't trade away this guy. I can't trade this guy to that guy because it's going to make his team better. All you should be concerned about, does it make my team better? And if it makes my team better, I need to do that trade. It's kind of like preparing for that and having more skill position players on your bench than maybe a backup tight end or a defense. Because I know that guys have done the 2 defense thing, like platooning defenses back and forth and just picking up one a week ahead of time, where it's just having those guys that are next in line for targets. We could talk about guys like Antonio Gandy Golden, right? He's a guy on Washington that he was probably going to be battling it out with Kelvin Harmon for the wide receiver 2 spot opposite Terry McLaurin. But now that Kelvin Harmon's out, that opportunity arises. You have to look on a depth chart and say, okay, if one player misses, who's the player that's going to benefit most from that's currently unrostered? Think about someone like Devontae Adams right now. If Devontae Adams were to miss time, is it Alan Lazard? It might be Devin Funchess. So those are guys that I'm willing to roster just because you have to look at who's going to get the most opportunity, because just because you're bumped into the starting lineup, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a whole lot more opportunity. There's certain players that benefit more than others. But I find myself more curious about what happens if there's no NFL season or if it's cut short about the NFL draft next year. We've talked about this in dynasty leagues and stuff like that, but what does the NFL do? Imagine that there is no season. You can't say that we just do the same exact draft order in 2020 or in 2021, because then you're rewarding the teams that finish poorly 2 years in a row. If there's a shortened season, do you base it off, when the season stops? Do you do a weighted lottery off of that? That's the part where, like, I'm curious to hear your point of view, because I know you're able to think outside the box a lot more than I am. And that's why I always appreciate talking to you. What do you think the NFL would do, and what do you think they should do if that were to be the case?
Yeah. Whatever they do, they'll decide it like 2 days before the draft. I think that how can I put this? Like many other institutions in our society, they probably haven't even contemplated it. They're too busy. Pat Thorman had a good quote on Twitter talking about, how there's more details for season ticket holders right now than the players about exactly how this season is going to go. And I think the metaphor was getting hit by a train or a bus while you're bending over to pick up a penny. You know, so I think for the listeners, for everyone out there, and this is something I'm working on 2 pieces right now. I'm just gathering information from people, and feel free, folks, hit me in the email, bloom@footballguys.com, if you have some ideas or some things that you would like these questions to be addressed, or at least for us to take a stab at the range of things you can do to solve them. I have one, Mike, that's the Player's Guide to Fantasy Football in the Time of Coronavirus, and the other is the Commissioner's Guide. And absolutely, as a dynasty commissioner right now, and much like the NFL, you need to get all of the stakeholders on board of, if there is no season this year, or if the season is abbreviated, how do we decide our rookie draft order for 2021? Another interesting thing, by the way, Tags, I don't know if you've seen, like, Bruce Feldman, great college football writer at The Athletic. I think he polled 20 different head coaches about whether he thinks players will just bolt for the NFL if there's no season until the spring. Mm-hmm. And Dane Brugler, I think, said he expected maybe hundreds of players. And certainly they said the agents are prepping players for this. I think the players that are higher up the board are more likely to do it. So there's a lot of things up in the air. But I would say the approaches, and this is something, again, with the NFL, basically the same as the NFL. You can leave it the same as it was the year before. That seems, as you said, a little bit too easy to reward the teams that had the early draft picks this year. I like something, Mike, like a weighted lottery among non-playoff teams and playoff teams. So if you're a playoff team, you're still picking 21st to 32nd. If you're a non-playoff team, you're still picking 1st to 20th. And then there's a weighted lottery based on, the way they do the lottery for any NBA, NHL. Although didn't the NHL just have a team to be determined win the lottery?
So I didn't even see it.
They have to do things differently north of the border, although at least they have north of the border to play their season in a safer bubble than American sports right now. And then you could just do a non-weighted lottery, just a true lottery, and then watch the Patriots would win it or something like that. But I think you're right to point out these questions because if coronavirus has taught us anything over the last 4 months, it's that we have to be prepared for anything, for everything, for things that we didn't contemplate or imagine before quickly becoming reality. And I think that maps directly to the question I asked you about preparing as a fantasy football GM. And a lot of the different advice we would give intersects with this idea of be ready for anything. And it's interesting because a season, Mike, the fun experience of the arc of a season is by week 13, you're relying on players or things, situations that in week 1 you would have laughed at, but these are players that when you went, Brashad Perryman last year or something like that. And I'm not going to say Mike. Moment of silence. Your brain gets massaged, right? Like over the course of a season, and we're all at the point where all of us fantasy analysts have been spending so much time staring at this stuff. Like I'm welcoming, hopefully, camp's getting open on time. I don't know if that's going to happen because we need new stuff to start processing. But the point is you stare at it for so long, but by the time the season is rolling, second half of the season, you're ready to embrace things that you would have just dismissed as impossible. And we just might have to do that right off the bat this year, like just as soon as we see the games. I'll ask you just as kind of like friend to friend or fan to fan, not even fantasy analyst to fantasy analyst, because the question I get, Mike, when I'm out talking to people is, do you think there's going to be a season? Do you think there's going to be a season? Do you think there's going to be a season? I mean, I don't even know how to weigh in on that. What would your answer be if someone asked you that right now?
I certainly hope so. Just because like I will lose my mind. As you were just talking about, we look at the same numbers and the stats. Like in season, we can't wait to get to the end to analyze everything and work through it and find out why things happened and look at, because we don't, in season, we don't have a bye week ourselves to like stop and look at things in depth that we really, really want to. We have a chance to do that over the off season, but we're now to the point where, we're in the middle of July. We've been able to look at anything we wanted to from last year, analyze it, break it down anyway, find new metrics, find little things that we can use to base our points off of. But we crave that new information because we need to see something different. We can't keep talking about the same things. And because I'll lose my mind. I'm at the point of the off season where I'm almost ready to do that already. where I just need some sort of training camp, some sort of news. And if there's no preseason, that's going to affect a lot of things too, right? We already have a shortened 1 to 2 games. They're talking about maybe eliminating it altogether. And that's going to change the way you would draft a fantasy football team. It's going to change the way we do our analysis leading up to fantasy football seasons, because we actually take the preseason into consideration, like understanding the depth chart, how it's rolling out, why they have players on the field in the third quarter. Someone might be expecting, like Antonio Gandy-Golden to start for the Redskins, but he may not be on the field. He may be on the field in the preseason in the third quarter, and you're like, well, this guy's he's not going to be out there with the starters in week 1 because he's playing into the second half with some backups. Though there's things to be learned from that. So if there's anything that we're taking away from this, this off season, it's that maybe be a little bit more hesitant to trust rookies because they haven't had a chance to learn the playbooks. Maybe the quarterbacks like Tua Tagovailoa, he's someone that a lot of people were expecting to take the job right away. I don't think he does. Someone like Justin Herbert, it's probably going to be Tyrod Taylor. And these rookies just haven't had a chance to learn the playbook. Keyshawn Vaughn, we already know that Bruce Arians doesn't trust like young running backs. And it's the same thing with Ronald Jones last year. He had almost nothing under his belt, so he was hesitant to trust him. We can go back to David Johnson way back in Arizona when he was a rookie, a third round rookie, mind you. He didn't give him more than, I think, 170 touches that year. And David Johnson was one of the most efficient running backs in all of football that year. So it's guys like that we need to pay attention to. But I don't want, I'm not going to be like the NFL and totally turn a blind eye to everything that's going on and say, I'm just hoping for the best. I have to I want to put positive vibes out there and say, it's almost like you want to put into your reality what you want. And I always try and do that. It's like foresee what you want to happen and make it happen. Unfortunately, this is something that none of us know anything about. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know if there's going to be an NFL season, or I know that there's a hell of a lot of money involved in terms of the NFL and what it means to the futures of the franchises, the contracts, because of how not having fans in the stadium, how that's going to affect the salary cap next year. If there is no season, how that affects the salary cap. All these deals, there's so much that goes into it. But as for me, when I'm talking to people, I just say, I really, truly hope so, because I think someone's going to have to check me into a mental institution if I have to talk about the 2019 season any longer.
Right. Or on one hand, like you said, there's the money pressure. And then I think that there's clearly a sense that sports was the finger in the dike of the mental health of the country, right?
Yeah.
Having that sports diversion. It's exactly why I think it was Kyrie Irving said, like, well, I don't know if I want to come back and play because it'll distract from the social issues and some of the progress that's being made to rethink, reform some things about our country. And I think that absolutely as we get closer to fall and cold and flu season, and something that we already knew and forecast, the summer was supposed to be the pause. The summer was supposed to be a bit of a break from coronavirus, and it's been the opposite. However, there's a lot of external forces that need this season to happen. And as far as positivity, again, I'll say I make a speech at the end of every show, Mike. Just like, wear your mask. I think if we can just get today, it's July 15th. If we can just get 95% of people in the country to wear masks, I think we'll be okay by September 10th when the season's supposed to start. We'll see. But we got a lot of talk. Let's just get to some of that staring at the 2019 season and actionable advice and takes. Yeah. Some good discussion for many people about the Tampa backfield. What's your overall prescription for the Tampa backfield in drafts?
It's Ronald Jones for me. I kind of laugh about it because, going into the NFL draft, you look at everyone's pre-draft rankings, and I don't know if I saw Keyshawn Vaughn very high on anybody's board. I know Kyle Yates that I work with, he was talking about Vaughn, and he liked him as a running back. I thought he was fine. I felt like he was a role player, that he's going to work in the NFL, but I don't think he's going to be a superstar or anything like that. Whereas Ronald Jones is a guy they obviously felt very good about in Tampa. And Bruce Arians, as I mentioned already, he's a guy that has a track record of trusting veterans over younger players. So to think that they're going to trust a third-round rookie to come in and take the job over Ronald Jones, who's already been in the system for a year, who's been working on his pass-catching ability. By the way, did you know Ronald Jones was I think it was 4th or 5th among running backs in yards per route run in 2019? He was actually fantastic. And in terms of where his touches took place in the field, he performed much better than the average running back would have in 2019. So it didn't have anything to do with his performance. It had to do with earning Bruce Arians' trust. And to know that they waited at running back until the 3rd round said a lot to me. They could have went out and got Devonta Freeman, who's a veteran who probably would have fit the system extremely well, would have meshed with Tom Brady very well as a good pass catcher out of the backfield, but they didn't. They still haven't. So to me, Ronald Jones is the guy I'm trusting, whereas Keyshawn Vaughn is a guy that he would benefit if Ronald Jones really fell flat on his face in terms of maybe fumbled multiple times in the game. Then we'd see Keyshawn Vaughn come into the game and try and steal that job from him. But Ronald Jones, as far as what I'm saying, it's almost like the Raheem Mostert thing. We can't pretend that we know that he's going to have the starting job or that he's going to get 15 touches per game. With Ronald Jones, we don't know that. And I'm not going to be, if I knew that Ronald Jones had the starting job right now, which I do believe he does, but I'm not going to say that I'm 100% certain. And if I knew he carried that job throughout the whole season, he'd be drafted as a top 18 running back without question, because that's going to be a high scoring offense. They do get carries inside the red zone, where if you were to put him and Peyton Barber, their roles together last year, or even 75% of the two of them, you would have had a very, very relevant fantasy running back. So with Brady there, it will change things. Ronald Jones is going to see fewer 8-man fronts, a lot of benefits, and they did upgrade the offensive line. So it's definitely Ronald Jones for me, whereas Keyshawn Vaughn he's essentially the handcuff.
And Mark Cook from the Pewter Report had said that, barring Jones just having a total meltdown in camp, he'll be the starter. And we know he's dynamic. So, yeah, I see a growing Ronald Jones movement, and I'm not going to tell people they're doing the wrong thing. I do wonder if a running back like Dare Ogunbowale fits Tom Brady better, at least the Tom Brady offense, just because of how proficient he's been with James White, another Wisconsin back. And Ogunbowale's strengths are his hands, his route running, his pass blocking. So just something to watch there. Let's just step through the positions really quick and just get your angle, like your plan A. What's your plan A at quarterback in the typical one quarterback leagues?
It was funny. I thought I was going to get Aaron Rodgers in a ton of leagues because people were drafting him outside the top 10 for a while there. And he's kind of moved up as of late, where I'm not going to grab him. Where if you don't get Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, you're going to wait at quarterback. I think that's what we all agree to. Dak Prescott is my number 3. And I'd be willing to snag him in the 5th, 6th round, depending on how the rosters are taking shape and how I feel about everything else. But we all play the streaming game as analysts, and I think that that's the way to go. You could take an upside pick. Like I'm a big fan of Joe Burrow, but the only issue with him is that to take a page out of Rumford Johnny, a friend of ours, to take a word out of his mouth, like vocabulary. He talks about which pancake is it? Is AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, T Higgins, Joe Mixon, all these guys, and it's like instead of taking individual pancakes, take the syrup that's going to throw it on top. And you have Burrow, a guy that's he's underrated when it comes to his mobility. And it's also a problem to Joe Burrow in his game, because Joe Burrow he has that Jay Cutler gene. He does not care. He will take a big hit, and I saw him take too many in college, where I hope he gets that under control. But Burrow, it's almost like the Jameis Winston thing from last year, where Winston started out the year slow and people came after all analysts and saying, oh, you guys were wrong after the first 2 weeks. And it's like, stick with him. It was a rough schedule. Burrow plays LA, the Chargers, in week 1. Yeah. That's a terrible schedule, like a way to start your league. So if you want to pick up a different quarterback, to start week 1, you could probably do that. And do you want to platoon quarterbacks? Probably not. That's why with me, I'm going to end up looking at schedules and saying, which one do I want to roll with? Because Joe Burrow, while I do like him and I think he's going to be a very fantasy relevant quarterback on a lot of weeks, if I can't start him week 1, what am I doing? You know what I mean? So I've even thought about someone like, I think Gardner Minshew. I think he plays Indianapolis week 1. Indianapolis secondary, going through some changes there. That could be a way to go, but I'm going to wait at quarterback most of the time, unless you're in an analyst league and you're able to get, guys like Dak Prescott in the 8th round. And then you're like, analysts overdo it. Let's be real about it. They overdo it, where if you get Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson in the 3rd round, take them. Like, don't worry about what someone's going to say to you. I'll take them there every day of the week. Again, Dak in the 5th, 6th round, I'm fine with that. But yeah, overall, we're probably going to wait at quarterback in regular leagues.
And are you dabbling at all into quarterback super flex? Getting a lay of the land for how you approach it in that format, as people should be trying it out.
For sure. And like people ask me that all the time, like, what's your strategy in 2 quarterback leagues? And I know it sounds boring, but you have to take the draft as it comes to you. I am such a value minded drafter that it's not even funny, where if you say, oh, if you can get this player here, I don't care. I want to see what's happening in the draft, where I don't want to be stuck with, let's see, someone like Derek Carr who can get benched for Marcus Mariota and Sam Darnold as my 2 quarterbacks in a 2 quarterback format. I'm not going to do that. Where I want one quarterback who I feel like can, lift me up in some weeks when my skill position players let me down. Maybe someone like a Josh Allen, maybe like a Carson Wentz. I like those guys. But then as your number 2 quarterback, you just want a guy that has 0 chance to lose the job. So I'm looking at guys like, if you want to wait at the position, you can get Gardner Minshew, who has 0 competition. By the way, that guy, like, he rushed for a lot of yards last year. He didn't score any rushing touchdowns, but if those start to become touchdowns in this new Jay Gruden offense, who, by the way, was giving Kirk Cousins like 5 or 6 goal line carries every single year, that's going to suddenly amount to a great QB2. Daniel Jones is a popular breakout candidate. Joe Burrow, I've talked about. These guys have 0 chance to lose their jobs. That's all I want as my QB2. I don't want to fall outside that range, because once you start getting into those guys like a Derek Carr, like a Ryan Fitzpatrick, you could be screwed. And and when you're in a 2 quarterback format and you're looking for a quarterback, it is the absolute worst position to be in, because no one is going to trade him to you.
Yeah, it's why it's kind of like how running back used to be and is getting to be again, where during a draft you have this hesitation because you feel like this player isn't nearly as good as the players at other positions. He isn't as consistent. He doesn't have the weekly ceiling. I don't feel as good about this quarterback as I do about all the other positions. But then you find if you wait a round or 2 later, you feel even worse, and the gap gets even bigger. And then, as you said, during the season, you really might be stranded, and you have to just really be willing to spend a lot of waiver wire bucks, or hopefully be one step ahead of the curve. And what's an interesting thing I do think you can exploit in Superflex drafts, Mike, is like oftentimes quarterback 25, 26, 27. And you're right. Like sometimes that's Derek Carr, but sometimes that's Gardner Minshew.
Right.
And the difference can be huge. But once everybody gets that second quarterback, there can be a exhale in the draft. And then you can really steal your second quarterback if you're willing to be the last one to take your second quarterback. I'm doing, by the way, we're all like 16th round now. Dynasty, Superflex, Best Ball, FFPC.
Wow.
It's been quite a pretzel. That's what's helped me not go crazy staring at 2019. I ended up trading my second, third, and fourth round picks to have doubled up picks in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th rounds.
Wow.
Because I figure quality over quantity. And the Dynasty format adds a wrinkle in Best Ball that I'm still trying to figure out. Anyway, turning the page. And I agree with you with the experts. And like expert mock drafts are somewhat worthless for projecting quarterbacks compared to your quote unquote home league, because we all want to one up each other waiting and get Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson in the 3rd round. I'm saying take him in the 2nd round this year if you can get him. Running back, and we talked a little bit about how now with some time those running backs in the 4th, 5th, 6th round or later start to look better. That's one piece of the running back strategy. Give me another one.
Like one of the mid-round ones?
Or just another pane in the mosaic of running back strategy way you're attacking running back this year.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a late 1st round pick, you should be happy that you get Kenyon Drake there. As far as I'm concerned, he's a true 3-down back in an offense that wants to run a lot of plays. And we know that about Cliff Kingsbury. Last year, they didn't have the ability to do that because the defense obviously was just horrendous and they couldn't get off the field. But adding Isaiah Simmons to the middle of that defense obviously helps them a bit. Some growth in, their second-year cornerback. So there's definitely improvement on that defense. And it's like if Kyler Murray takes a step forward, this offense will be more explosive. They have DeAndre Hopkins. there's no coordinator that can walk into a game plan against the Cardinals and say, all right, we have to stop Kenyon Drake and we'll worry about everything else. That's not how it works. If you were to take just the starting running back, which would be 6 games from David Johnson, 2 games from Chase Edmonds, and then 8 games from Kenyon Drake last year, and put those into the season, they would have finished as the number 3 fantasy running back. So it's just taking the starting running back, not everyone on the roster. Right behind Christian McCaffrey and Aaron Jones. So it's clearly a backfield that has tons of production. Kenyon Drake has under 500 carries on his frame in the NFL. Like that's why when he gets in the field, he looks like a young running back. He just doesn't have very many miles. He's playing under a transition tag, so he's playing for another contract. There's a lot of reasons for Kenyon Drake to kind of explode. So I love getting him at the end of the first round. If you have a pick there, I've debated putting Drake up there with Mixon in terms of like the number 6 running back. Between Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Kenyon Drake, I can't really decide because there's pros and cons to each of them. But say, where are you at on Todd Gurley? We recorded our podcast today, and I was talking with Andy Behrens about it, and he's with me on this one where it's like we have Gurley, a guy that has a track record of almost breaking a record in terms of fantasy points in a season. Signed a 1-year deal with the Falcons. There's absolutely zero competition on the roster. The Falcons are they're just continually a top 6 to top 10 scoring offense, which obviously gives you a better chance. I released an article last week. It was what does team scoring mean for fantasy football? And while it might seem obvious, just how important is it to certain positions? And running backs, if you're part of a top 12 scoring offense, which makes up 37% of the NFL, you have I think it was a 70% chance or 72% chance to finish as a top 6 running back. So it's basically saying you have a double the chance to finish as an elite running back as someone that's not on a top 12 scoring offense. Right. So when Todd Gurley has zero competition, why are we fading him? I understand that there's some injury concerns for sure, but I thought down the stretch, Todd Gurley looked good. They just didn't target him in the passing game at all with the Rams last year. That team just like suddenly went from a team that targeted the running back position to kaput. Like there was not a team in the NFL that targeted running backs less than the Rams last year. And again, Gurley did not look good at the beginning of the season. And I think part of it had to do with him not participating in a lot of the OTA workouts, them taking it easy in the preseason. He looked bad. And then the second half of the season, I said, Gurley started to look better to me. Again, playing on that 1-year deal, getting cut from a roster, I think there's a lot of motivation here for a player like Todd Gurley, who, again, a very high-scoring offense, and that's what I want to attach myself to running backs from.
Yeah, real quickly, just on Drake, to further drive home your point, he only had 279 touches in college, 233 carries at Alabama. So, yeah, he's got the fresh legs. And I also just say as an aside, I want to root for Arizona this year. I like a lot of the players. I like the way they're putting things together. Lord knows the people of the state of Arizona could use something for sure. It was real fun last year. I was actually on an airplane during week 1 of the season. And when I got on the plane, they were losing to Detroit, 24-6 or something. And when I got off the plane, the game was in overtime. And I was in Phoenix. And I got to watch people coming off the plane and looking at the TVs in the terminal and going, doing a double take and seeing, hey, it's a new age in Arizona. And I'm looking forward to what year 2 brings. Gurley. I think some of it you touched on. There's a stigma when a player gets released, right? It's like, if his team is giving up on him, then why are we going in for more? And he got a modest contract. I think you're right that he looked better in the second half of the year. I don't think he's going to be involved as a receiver much anymore. I think just with the nature of his knees, it's not something that he's well suited for, but he can still be a good downhill runner. I think there's hope for Atlanta's offensive line with hopefully the rookies from last year, McGarry and Lindstrom, being healthier. The whole team got better in the second half of the year last year. My worry is just that week-to-week nature of his knees and how, in a year where we're talking about what are the inactives going to look like? Are we going to be waylaid by surprise inactives and things like that? That's kind of what we had to think about with Gurley, although I think, missed 1 game with that thigh issue. I will say this about Gurley, and here's my best argument to take him, Mike. Atlanta opens with Seattle, Dallas, Chicago, Green Bay, and Carolina. Only Chicago is a formidable run defense. Mm-hmm. And you might say Seattle, and certainly Seattle and Green Bay, are not good run defenses. bad run defenses. Like any rational offensive coordinator is going to say, let's run until they prove they can stop it. And I think that may apply to Dallas. They have a new look defensive line, and it may apply to Carolina that just has a new look defense in general. So Gurley could get off to a hot start and score like 7 touchdowns in the first 5 games or something like that, and then I'd sell. But if I'm going running back in the third round, I'm probably going with Melvin Gordon, another guy that I think is being underestimated just based on what he established on his track record, and maybe we tuned out when he was playing his best football last year. So I can dig it. I can dig it with Gurley, although, come November, December, I'm not so sure I want to count on him. Any late round running backs you like? Anybody in the second half of the draft that you're trying to stash away?
Yeah, Ronald Jones is definitely one of them. I mean, he's moving up draft boards now, so we're not going to be able to say him for much longer. Tariq Cohen, we obviously talked about him earlier in the show. Dobbins has moved up draft boards, where I understand the appeal with Dobbins, but it's getting to the point now where people might be disappointed because it's not going to happen right away. But once you get later in the draft, Zack Moss. Zack Moss is someone that he might be better than Devin Singletary. And I understand that people like Singletary a lot. And, people were assuming that he was going to have the workhorse role, and then they go and they draft Zack Moss in the 3rd round. That's the same draft pick that they used to draft Singletary in 2019. So clearly these running backs are on, I don't want to say even playing field, because Devin Singletary proved that he can get some stuff done last year, but they were hesitant to give him a full workload until Frank Gore just completely broke down. Frank Gore, the second half of the season, I don't know why Frank Gore is coming back to play. I love the guy, and you root for guys like that, but I don't know why he's playing football still. Zack Moss reminded me of Kareem Hunt on film. He was in my top 5 running backs in this class, and I was really curious to see where he would go. So when you hear the Bills GM come out and say that he's going to play the Frank Gore role, Gore had plenty of opportunity in this offense last year. He ranked, I think it was 10th or 11th among running backs on carries inside the 5-yard line. So if Zack Moss starts getting those carries, those are the most valuable ones. Whereas Devin Singletary would almost turn into like a Tariq Cohen, not the same way of production, but not getting the most valuable touches, inside the 5-10 yard line, because, well, Devin Singletary's 3rd in line for red zone carries behind guys like Zack Moss and Josh Allen. So Moss is someone I definitely look to. And Damian Harris, that's the last one I'm going to bring up, because and that was a bold prediction I just recorded, was that Damian Harris starts the year as the Patriots starting running back. And I think this is because Sony Michel just hasn't been the same player since that they drafted. I liked Sony Michel in college. I'm not afraid to say that. I loved him coming out of Georgia. But then coming into the NFL after this knee surgery, the scopes and all this stuff, he didn't look like the same player on the Patriots. Like, he looks like a guy that's struggling to move, and he's only getting what's blocked, and he just doesn't create yardage. And now having another surgery this offseason on his foot, I believe this team is ready to move on. I think that they had to say, we're going to ride with Sony. They're giving him all the confidence in the world. But Damian Harris is a guy from Alabama that I said in his scouting profile, I said, he's going to make some coach very happy. And I said that because he's a very downhill runner. He's not going to miss, he's not going to miss his holes. He's not going to dance. He's going to get what you want. And going from Tom Brady to Cam Newton running this offense, wanting to be a defense first team, I believe that Damian Harris is a better fit for this offense right now. So to get him as a guy that's maybe undrafted in a lot of leagues, Damian Harris is a name that you should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think with Sony Michel, it's just one of those situations where it's clear he's just not going to be the player he was in Georgia. And how much more interesting does the Patriots offense become after they sign Cam Newton? Because I was really just passing the Patriots offense as a whole. Are you buying that? Are you thinking that Cam Newton could really change the complexion, not just of their offense, but of their season? I don't want to say that Cam Newton's not going to be very good, but in terms of a fantasy perspective, it's tough for me to say that this team got a whole lot better from just wanting to attack them in fantasy, because you think there's been one season in Cam Newton's career where he's thrown more than 24 touchdowns. So therefore the touchdowns aren't going to be there like Tom Brady when he's throwing 30, 36 touchdowns. The one player who I did move up my board based on Cam Newton was Nikhil Harry. And I'm not a huge Nikhil Harry fan. I wasn't when he came out of school, because I didn't feel like he could separate. He needed a quarterback that's willing to throw it into tight spaces, and he can win in contested catches. He's one of the better receivers out there. He's very physical. So he needs a quarterback that's willing to throw the ball in those situations. And Cam Newton is the guy that'll do that. I mean, he had Devin Funchess back in Carolina. He had Kelvin Benjamin. He's willing to throw it up into those tight spaces. Not the most accurate quarterback, but did get better. I think it was in 2018. His percentage went up because he started just checking down
all the time to Christian McCaffrey. So I think this hurts James White a little bit, just because the offense overall is going to have fewer pass attempts, and they're not going to bump up James White's target share. Brady already targeted the running backs an awful lot. So I'm not really interested in the Patriots from a fantasy perspective this year, because again, I don't know if there's going to be enough touchdowns where I can say I can start Harry with any confidence, because Edelman's still going to get targets. They traded a second round pick for Mohamed Sanu. So Damian Harris is the probably the one that I'll wind up on teams, because I want to see if he's going to start the year as the starter, because he just might be a better running back than Sony Michel in the pros.
Yeah, I think that he'll be competent. And when Mike Reese says, things are going to get bigger and better for Harris this year, I listen. I always listen to anything he has to say about the Patriots. I like the call at least to be open to Harry doing more. We all remember Kelvin Benjamin and what Newton could do. Newton did help McCaffrey have his first 100-catch season. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see for these teams that have new quarterbacks, with the exception of maybe Brady, because he got his guy Gronkowski. But for the teams that have new quarterbacks, like Rivers in Indianapolis and Tyrod Taylor with the Chargers, who becomes their guy? And I know that we're going to have reporting restrictions from training camp, but I think the beat writers still know how to wink, wink, nudge, nudge, tell us things without coming out and breaking league policy. So I'm going to be watching that for sure, because on the other side, you have like Juju. Like you were bringing up Juju earlier, where they're just, Adam Thielen, I think of, the targets where this is when the bullets are flying, who the quarterback's going to rely on. We want to learn who that target is going to be for some of these new quarterbacks. I'm just excited that Cam Newton's playing with the Patriots, and just all the way that throws a monkey wrench into everything. Okay, as the clock marches on, wide receivers is so deep. It's so deep. You can wait and kick it down the road and kick it down the road and kick it down the road. But you do have to eventually take some wide receivers in your draft. Which ones are you taking?
I mean, some of my favorite targets going through the tiers, obviously Juju, as I mentioned. If you get Beckham in the third round, I'm taking him there all day long. Like it's very rare to find a wide receiver who could finish as the wide receiver one outside the top 2 rounds, but Beckham's that guy. Don't forget that Baker Mayfield did set the record for passing touchdowns as a rookie. Last year, the entire offense was terrible. And even that includes Jarvis Landry, but guys, because Jarvis Landry may have finished as a top 15 fantasy wide receiver, but in terms of his actual game, what he did on a consistent basis, he was not very good last year. Working your way down, Calvin Ridley is like, he's a guy that I'm probably going to have on a ton of my fantasy teams. True breakout potential. We've talked about him being a possible Chris Godwin this year, because the Falcons do pass the ball a lot. They never replaced Mohamed Sanu. It's not like Russell Gage is going to get a whole lot of targets. I like Hayden Hurst a lot. And it's like the Falcons are a team that I find myself stopping and saying, wait, how do I be more conservative with this team? Because I'm loving everybody a little bit too much. But you have to think, with Dirk Cutter there as the coordinator, they've been top 7 or top 8 in pass attempts every year he's there. Julio is always productive on a per target standpoint in terms of yardage. He's still playing at a high level. Calvin Ridley entering year 3. He's been a stud when he's on the field. And then you have Hayden Hurst, a guy that people want to forget about, and they want to say, it's Hayden Hurst. He's a draft bust. He's not a bust if he was playing behind Mark Andrews, who happens to be one of the most talented tight ends in football. That doesn't mean Hayden Hurst sucks. Hayden Hurst is probably going to be very good. And that's one of my bold predictions this year, is that he's going to finish as a top 6 fantasy tight end. I like Hayden Hurst that much. But Calvin Ridley, he's kind of proved it as he's come into the league. And then moving further down, like I love getting guys like DK Metcalf around that wide receiver 20, 24 range, because you're getting a guy that he's going to put up wide receiver 3 numbers more often than not, but there's a chance for legitimate top 10 breakout potential here. When you're tied to someone like Russell Wilson, who completes nearly 70% of his passes to wide receivers, it's kind of ridiculous. And every year, everybody wants to say, Tyler Lockett's going to regress. DK Metcalf's going to regress because they can't remain that efficient. We said the same thing about Doug Baldwin. Russell Wilson's that good. Russell Wilson is a freak, and knowing that the Seattle Seahawks defense is worse than it's ever been is only a good thing for guys like Russell Wilson, for DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, because that just means more pass attempts. They had some cornerback problems last year. They couldn't stop the run. They couldn't stop. The Seahawks defense was bad, and then they go out and get Quentin Dunbar this offseason, and then he gets arrested. He's not going to be playing in football. So that's like that was their number 1 free agent acquisition, not going to be playing football. Jadeveon Clowney, is he leaving? Probably. So DK Metcalf, love him. DJ Chark plays for a bad team, and that's my concern about him, but he's a really good football player. I'm going to have a lot of AJ Green. I'm not even going to be shy about it.
Nope.
I when the guy's in the field, you start him every single week, and you can't say that about a lot of wide receivers that are in the wide receiver 28 to 30 range, where guys like Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, that there's going to be some weeks, but you're not going to feel comfortable every single week putting them in their lineup. AJ Green is one of those guys, so that's up there. One of the guys, Sig, how are you feeling? Because it seems like everybody has a disconnect about how to feel about the Raiders offense this year. And Henry Ruggs is a guy that I did not like very much in the pre-draft process. Like, Jerry Jeudy should have been their pick. That's like, I don't have any question in my mind that Jerry Jeudy is going to be the best wide receiver from this class. But Henry Ruggs is walking into a situation where he meshes extremely well with someone like Derek Carr, because Derek Carr is a very check down type quarterback, and people view Ruggs just because he's fast as a field stretcher. That's not who he is. Jeudy was actually more of the downfield receiver for Alabama than Ruggs was. Ruggs was a guy, you get the ball in screens, you get the ball in slants, and you expect him to do work after the catch. If he's getting 80, 85 targets in this offense, which is very realistic based on the talent they have on the team, Henry Ruggs is probably going to be the most productive rookie wide receiver from this class, and he's being drafted outside the top 55 wide receivers right now. I mean, I think like him and Will Fuller, Ruggs has proven the ability to stay healthy, but I'm saying, like, when you look at this and you're saying, okay, one's tied to a better quarterback, I could see it, but the discount you're getting on Ruggs is a guy that you deal with some bumps and bruises along the way, some ups and downs, but when he hits, he's going to hit.
Yeah, Ruggs is fun in so much that he adds that speed, and you have Darren Waller and Tyrell Williams and Hunter Renfrow. It's just the potential critical point of failure is the quarterback.
Yeah.
That's probably why there's hesitation. And also they're going to want to run Josh Jacobs a lot. It'll be interesting, that week one tilt between the Raiders and Carolina. That could get you at least off to a good start with Ruggs. And I just hope that they have a lot of plays. It's the same thing I hope for Curtis Samuel in Carolina, where they have a lot of plays where he gets the ball with a running start, slants and jet sweeps and things like that, because I'm not necessarily counting on Derek Carr to hang in there to get the ball to him on plays that have to take a long time to develop downfield deep shots. And if they do go to Marcus Mariota, then, it's like the opposite of what happened to Tennessee last year. We're in the last 10 minutes where I usually go off the rails. We didn't get a chance to talk tight end. We'll get a chance to talk again, though. So I guess I'll just circle back to what we were talking about. How did you get interested in working on cars?
It's weird because most people grow up either in a sports family or a car family. Like, there's almost like no in between. Like, you have NASCAR families and drag families, and then you have, sports families. I was part of a sports family where my wife was part of a NASCAR racing family. And it's like, I would watch like movies growing up, and like you see a car, do a fishtail when they're leaving, like Gone in 60 Seconds or whatever like that. And you'd see those Mustangs. And I always wanted a car that could do that, just slide sideways like that, because it just looked cool to me. And then it led to me when I was 17, I was like, I'm going to go look at a muscle car. I just wanted something that was rear wheel drive. I didn't have any allegiance. My family wasn't a Ford family or Chevy. It didn't matter. So I went and I drove a Trans Am, a Camaro, and a 5.0 Mustang. And I learned that there was 350s in the GM cars. And then there was a little 302 in the Ford, and the Ford was the fastest of the bunch. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go with Ford. And so I bought that Mustang, and speed is a weird thing. You don't think you need it until you get it, because you start driving it for a while, and it's fast to begin with. And then you start saying, well, I want to make it faster. How do I do that? And you do one thing, and it feels fast when you do it. And then it's like, okay, after a month, you're going to get bored of that, and you just keep going faster. And it's an addiction, really. And it's a weird one, because I've gone from like fast street cars and this and that. And now, my latest Mustang, I think this is my 10th Mustang that I've owned. This one is, it's a 3,000 pound car. It's a smaller car. We threw a turbo on it, and we're building it up. We're doing suspension. I broke the trans actually at the track this past weekend, but the front tires are going to be coming off the ground soon, basically when I hit the gas. And I've only got, it's only getting faster. And I again, it's an addiction where I say that I want a car that I'm going to be able to drive on the street, but at some point you get so fast that the car just can't go on the street, because not only are you getting 4 or 5 miles to the gallon, but the tires just won't stick when you hit the gas. So I'm teetering that fine line right now, where I still drive a street car that I can drive on the street. But if I want to go faster, it almost turns into a trailer queen where I just kind of bring it to the racetrack. But if you ever have a chance to drive a fast car, it's adrenaline. I mean, it makes you feel alive. And when you go down the drag strip and, you hit the gas and you're almost looking up at the clouds, that's a whole lot of fun. Again, it's just addicting.
Yeah, no, this is good because I feel like this is one of those like parental advisory suggested, someone that's like 15 or 16, because you're wise enough now to know about justifiable risks and unjustifiable risks with that speed. But at the same time, what I really want to see is take everything you've learned, because as you're talking about this, what I'm thinking is you're getting a real holistic understanding of how all of these systems and subsystems of a vehicle fit together to create the locomotion, and how tweaking this or tweaking that increases performance. And then you can apply all of this to like a go-kart, like take an old lawnmower engine and then make a go-kart that can go like 50 miles an hour. Right?
No, Sig, I kid you not. This weekend, my brother-in-law, he brought his fiance to the track, and it was her first time ever at a track. She knows nothing about cars. There was a snowblower that was doing, I kid you not, a snowblower that ran under 10 seconds in the quarter mile.
Yeah. It's
madness.
Great. So what I foresee is some sort of contest, right? Like who can win the race? Like you're only allowed to use a lawnmower engine, or you're only allowed to use like engines up to this horsepower, and then who can add in all these. It's like the old Pinewood Derby from Boy Scouts, except for adults, basically, and see what happens. By the way, when I was in the Pinewood Derby with the actual go-karts, I wrecked it before I even got to the end of the track. So this is like the picture of Bloom and tags. Like you're blowing out the transmission. I'm just wrecking into the wall before I even complete a lap. It's fun though, because it's just like anything. I mean, I think now, if it's not fantasy football, of course, we're like the authors of the Great Distraction. Anything. I can find myself getting. I was talking earlier during quarantine about doing 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles. As long as you're doing something where you're just immersed in that task and you kind of forget your ego, you forget yourself, and you're just part of that task, just doing your lawn work. It can be, yard work, whatever. It helps bring peace at a time that we could definitely use it. I'll say this just because you and I have talked so much over the years. Now you're really at cruising altitude as a fantasy analyst. How is it? How has it changed? Getting better, things you've learned, unanticipated. Let's check in.
I mean, this offseason's been weirder than ever. Because people ask like, oh, are you slow with no sports? I'm like, I'm busier than ever because I'm a football full time. So it's almost like football's the one sport that's had hope this entire time because they haven't canceled things. Free agency still happen, the draft still happen. They're still planning on the season, so nothing's really slowed down. For me, it's the one thing I can say for if someone's out there listening and saying, if I didn't have my day job, I could do so much more. Yes, you could do much more, but it's a true sickness where you get ideas in your mind and you're like, now I have time to research this. And then it leads to another question. It's almost like a car where, when you replace one part, it's going to cause the other parts to be more strenuous and you're going to have to upgrade that other part. And when you upgrade that other part, it's like, well, I might as well do this while I'm here because you have something opened up. That's how I feel about fantasy, is that it's like a never ending thing where I have to find myself stopping from working too much, especially in the off season, because you go down this rabbit hole and you start finding one thing and you're like, well, would this correlate? And then you spend a couple hours on something else and you're like, no, it didn't correlate, but at least I looked into it. And then trying to decide what to write about to help fantasy owners. So I feel like I've gotten to the point now where I'm in, I think this is my 4th or 5th off season doing it full time, where I have a good idea of what fantasy owners do appreciate and what they find useful. So I try and just dedicate my time to that, but understand that even if you do it full time, I know a friend of mine, Derek Brown, he just got a job full time in the industry.
Great dude.
And he was telling me, he's like, oh, Tags, I can't wait until, because he was working long hours and then, doing fantasy stuff. And I'm like, understand that there's going to be things that you still can't do, but you need to just prioritize everything. And, actually spend time with your family. I guess that's the best thing to do, because we have to do that sometimes. And sometimes it's difficult to remember that, because, we have this we're fortunate enough, to have those of you who are tuning in right now, listening to the show, watching the show, anything. Thank you guys, seriously, from the bottom of our hearts. That's why we do it. That's why I do it. And I know that it's not something, I don't ever take it for granted. And the fact that, someone else out there is like, me 10 years ago when I started working in the fantasy community, and I know they want my job, and I have to make sure I don't let them have it. So I'm going to keep doing the work as long as you guys check out our stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo that gratitude, and absolutely, this sense of balance. It's harder than ever when your job is something that you really like to have work-life balance, because you can work and work at the peak. I probably would work 12 or 14 hours a day on fantasy because it never ends.
Yep.
Because you can just keep going and going and going. And I remember one of the things establishing with Kate as we are building our life is she's like, well, when are you not working? And I'm like,
Good question.
So boundaries.
That's a great question, honestly. Like, I don't think there's a time where I can just say I'm not.
Yeah, I know. It's bad. It's bad and it's good. Watch what you wish for, right?
For sure.
And the patience of all the people around us for getting to have an obsession turn into an occupation. Thank you, folks out there, always again for giving us this opportunity. Please, wherever you are, stay safe, mask, wash your hands, keep the social distancing. And again, I want to say, I know I'm talking to people who are like, yeah, wear a mask, but the more we wear masks, hopefully we can be a good influence on those around us, so we can have football and all those other things in our life that we miss. We love y'all because you're so very